Hi, this is Ash Nallawalla, and this is SEO in 2025.
Ash, what's your number one SEO tip for 2025?
My number one tip for 2025 is digital governance. It is lacking in most web-enabled businesses, at least in a formal sense. Although websites have been around for 20 years or more, their execution tends to be ad hoc, ultimately resulting in a less than ideal outcome for the business. This word digital is a loose term that people use when they think of computers in the context of governance. It covers websites, social media platforms, our software if we are in the business of making software, or if we make apps, then it includes apps for mobile phones and tablets. So the definition tends to vary a little. It usually implies the internet. It doesn't have to, but usually it does.
How would you describe the current digital governance setup in most organizations at the moment?
It is, there is definitely governance present in most large companies, but their definition of governance tends to be the traditional form of what they call ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance. The word governance is repeated in ESG. And these are all the good things that companies want to be known for, being good corporate citizens, for example, but basically making sure that they don't fail in their business and they don't give themselves a bad name. So that's roughly what's happening in the sense of governance. I want to zoom in on digital governance, which is a subset of it and possibly a neglected part of it.
So would you say neglected? You would say that many organizations aren't taking this seriously then?
I suspect that they're not aware that they're not taking it seriously. When you look at websites, they've basically been started by someone rather enthusiastic about the topic maybe 20 years ago, and over the years they realized they needed to smarten up, hire the right people. Sometimes this is the issue that they think they've hired the right people. The people whom they've hired think that they're doing the right things. But when you look at one company and you compare it with another, you might find that they might be doing things differently. And this is where a formal system of digital governance can help to tidy up what I think is a bit of a mess that upper management is not really aware of.
I got you. Okay. So what would you say are the key elements to successful digital governance?
So there are three high-level elements. The first is organization policies. The second is reference standards. And the third is processes and procedures. So I'll cover the first one, organization policies. Again, in the context of digital governance, they include the website-related policies, plus the broader company-wide policies. For example, the company might have an accessibility policy that applies to its physical premises, its mobile apps, and its websites. It might also have a policy about inclusive language or a corporate tone of voice or how often content should be updated. So these are examples of organization policies. Moving on to reference standards, website-related standards can be a whole bunch of standards, but primarily they are W3C standards, which is the most important one. That's the World Wide Web Consortium. It develops these standards for, say, HTML, accessibility, internationalization, privacy, security, and so on. So every website should make sure that it's following these standards as best as it can. The next one is accessibility, which is a subset of the W3C standards. And I refer to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, so WCAG. And these documents explain how to make web content more accessible to people with disabilities. The next is privacy standards. Privacy standards tend to be country-based, or in the case of Europe, EU-based. They include personal privacy and data. You have security standards, there's a whole bunch of them. The goal of information security standards is to reduce cyber attacks. They cover software, technology, and processes. And there are many other technical standards beyond the scope of this conversation. But for example, many cover the web technology necessary for the websites to function.
Wow. So a great deal to be included there. How do you prioritize everything? I mean, what are some key initial first steps that organizations need to take to improve digital governance?
The first thing the company needs to do is to recognize that it needs a governance framework and then begin from there. For example, it might want to focus on the three core elements of this governance, namely SEO, AI, and content governance. The second being technical governance. The third is leadership that oversees all of this. So, for example, and this may depend on the company in question, but possible framework could be governance committee consisting of the following representatives from legal, risk, data science, network engineering, content, information management, privacy, ethics, social responsibility, and last but not least, the SEO team. Now, these are middle managers who are accountable for these topics, and they can speak for the company on those topics. They're not C-suite members. How often should they meet? Ideally, they should meet when required. I don't believe in having fixed monthly meetings where sometimes there is nothing to discuss and sometimes you may need to meet every week. So they meet as often as required, and the meeting doesn't have to be a formal meeting with people on a conference screen such as Zoom, or in person meeting such as a boardroom. No, a lot of these deliberations can be done by email as long as the discussions are recorded. I don't advise using any instant messaging platforms because those conversations are hard to find, and sometimes they might get erased because someone didn't know that there was an important conversation happening, say, in a Slack channel. So these need to be formal meetings.
So the framework that you started talking about there, is that something that can be accessed off the shelf as a standard template to begin with, or does each organization really have to create something bespoke to begin with?
There are many, many consultants who have their own framework. And from my quick comparison, I found that definitions differ between consultants. So I suspect that a bespoke formula will be found for every individual company. And that's because sometimes some of those hats are worn by the same person. So legal might also look after risk, for example, if it's a medium-sized company.
So, I mean, you talk about different job roles there. Is there any particular job role that needs to take ownership of this?
The committee, because it's a committee, naturally the C-suite needs to appoint a committee chairman. How they do it will depend on the dynamics of that particular company. usually there is a champion who emerges, and that champion may come from any of these areas. Personally, I'd like to see it's the SEO team being the champion, because they're quite aware of the web implications of content, and especially now with AI in focus, although there are lots of experts who have suddenly emerged to advise companies about AI, they may not necessarily be thinking about the issues that we see from the SEO lens.
So how does this impact hiring, training, and workflow?
So hiring needs to, and I'm speaking from the governance angle, the governance framework needs to make sure that the hiring process is in tune with the corporate values. So, for example, ethics is pretty important. So the hiring process should make sure that whoever is hired is not going to mislead customers or cheat them or do all those nasty things, which sometimes might be a tactic used by aggressive salespeople, to use an example. So hiring needs to be under control at a policy level. The details are left to the individual teams, who they select, what are the selection criteria. They would be rather technical, and that would not be the concern of the governance committee.
So obviously we're approaching this subject through the lens of SEO. Does this digital governance process, way of doing things, have any positive measurable impact on SEO?
The impact on SEO would not be a number that can be looked up with some tool. The benefits would be a sense of, I'd call it happiness in a professional sense. Everything seems to be working. Everyone is happy. The numbers are moving in the right direction. And that can be for many reasons, but these things happen if there are no blockages. Good governance makes sure that there are no blockages from a policy perspective. If anything goes wrong, then it might be a technical decision that someone took, but there's definitely not a policy issue that stopped two teams from working together, for example.
If an SEO is struggling for time, what should they stop doing right now so they can spend more time thinking about digital governance in 2025?
The first thing the SEO needs to do is to do a quick audit. Even if it's not a formal audit, they can simply examine the company and look for any blockages that suggest a lack of governance or a lack of awareness. And so they would need to start the conversation with someone in the C-suite to talk about the benefits of digital governance. And once they get them on board, then they could suggest that content would be a good place to start, because content usually does not require investment in some technology or hiring experts, and usually the C-suite will come on board, especially if they can explain why content is really important in the world of AI and generative AI in particular. They would get the support of the management.
Ash Nallawalla is a consultant at CRM911 Digital, and you can find him over at CRM911.com. Ash, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2025.
Thank you very much.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2025, the book, over at SEOin2025.com.